The 6-month-old son of the millionaire was continuously losing weight each day, and despite the father consulting 18 renowned physicians and spending millions of dollars, all were baffled as to the cause. This continued until a nurse uncovered a horrific truth that changed everything. The 36-hour shift at Brooklyn General Hospital came to an end in the silence of the empty corridor. Amelia Harper dragged her leaden feet out of the pediatric emergency room. At 27, her deeply shadowed eyes and pale complexion made her look significantly older. In this city's most economically disadvantaged area, nurses had to do more than just help treat illnesses. They also had to soothe the despair of families unable to afford medications. Amelia did this every day, but today that same despair seemed to be consuming her. A woman in a gray suit stood blocking the exit, holding a thick file. It was the hospital's financial manager. She offered no greeting, only adjusted her glasses as she looked at Amelia. "Dr. Harper, I hate to pressure you after a long shift, but the bank just sent a third notice about your student loan debt. That $250,000 figure hasn't shrunk much in the last 2 months." Amelia clenched her hands inside her lab coat pockets, trying to keep her voice as steady as possible. "I know, I'm trying to pick up extra shifts. With the seasonal pediatric flu cases, I'll be getting hazard pay." The manager shook her head. "The issue isn't how hard you try, it's the bottom line. The hospital is downsizing staff. Doctors with high-risk financial profiles like yours will be first on the contract review list. You have 1 week to demonstrate your ability to make payments, Amelia. Don't force us to make a difficult decision." The woman walked away, leaving Amelia rooted to the cold corridor floor. She had no time for sorrow. She pushed the door open and stepped out into the night air, taking a long breath to clear the smell of antiseptic. But the vibrating of the phone in her pocket pulled her back to a harsh reality. The screen displayed the name of Dr. Evans Lilly's attending physician. Amelia's heart skipped a beat. "Amelia, I'm sorry to call this late. Lilly just experienced a sudden collapse. Her blood counts are in a rapid, dangerous decline." Amelia pressed the phone tightly to her ear, her voice catching. "How is she? I'm coming right now. She's conscious now, but we are running out of time. The bone marrow transplant must happen this week. The hospital requires a 50% deposit by tomorrow morning to secure the surgery schedule and the donated tissue. You need to gather $75,000 immediately or else." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Without the funds, Lilly would pass away. Her adopted younger sister, the only family she had left, the 22-year-old girl with a bright smile, despite the devastating blood disorder, would be gone forever. Amelia hung up. She opened her banking app. The number on the screen mocked her $128. She sank onto the cold stone bench outside the hospital gate. She saved hundreds of children every year, yet she was powerless to stop her sister from wasting away for lack of that green paper. Amelia buried her face in her hands, wanting to weep, but her tears seemed to have dried up along with her strength. The phone vibrated again, an unfamiliar number. Amelia was about to hang up, but her finger instinctively slid to the answer button. "Dr. Harper, it's Maria Santos. Do you remember me? You saved my son 2 years ago when no one else would see him." A memory surfaced. The poor mother and the child with severe lung infection. Amelia vaguely recalled the event. "I remember Maria. What is it? Is your son ill again?" Maria's voice on the other end was trembling, urgent, and full of fear. "It's not my son. I'm working as a caregiver for a family in Manhattan. The baby I look after. He's fading away, doctor. He's withering by the day. His father has called in the best professors in the country, spent millions, but nobody knows what's ailing him. I remembered you. You see things others miss." Amelia sighed, rubbing her aching temples. Maria, I'm just a doctor at a public hospital. If the top experts are stumped, how can I help? Besides, I have a family emergency. My boss is Elias Sterling. The name stopped Amelia cold. Sterling. The family that controlled the energy sector. The people who held sway over the flow of petroleum and capital. Their power in this city was absolute and often treacherous, a world to which someone like her had never belonged. He's offering $1 million reward for anyone who can help his son. Maria continued, her voice pleading like someone drowning, grasping for a lifeline. Money means nothing to him. You just need to come take a look. Please, doctor. Little Mason. He looks at me with such sad eyes. He doesn't deserve this. Amelia looked down at her phone screen where the banking app still displayed the paltry $128. Then she thought of Lily, frail in her stark white hospital room, waiting for a miracle called a deposit. Professional ethics and self-respect warned her not to get involved with the complicated lives of the super rich. But Lily's survival left her no choice. This was the biggest gamble of her life. Text me the address, Amelia said, her voice hardening. I'll be right there. She hung up, clenching the phone in her hand until her knuckles were white. Amelia stood up and hurried toward the employee parking lot. She inserted the key into her 10-year-old Honda Civic. The car groaned before the engine finally caught with a labored start. Amelia firmly pressed the accelerator. The old car zoomed out of the hospital gate, leaving the shadowy, run-down neighborhood behind. 30 minutes later, the old Honda Civic let out a final heavy sigh and stalled its engine directly in front of the Sterling Mansion gates. The sudden silence made the car's cooling fan sound like the gasping breath of a dying old animal. Before Amelia, the Sterling estate loomed like a secure fortress, completely separated from the outside world by towering stone walls and cold, sweeping searchlights. In the driveway, a fleet of luxury automobiles gleamed neatly under the lights, making her mud-splattered car look like an oddity that had wandered into a sanctuary. A tall man stepped out of the gatehouse, Viktor Petrov. His black suit hugged a solid build, and he wore a specialized earpiece. He walked over and gently tapped on Amelia's car window. You've taken a wrong turn. Delivery is at the back gate. Amelia rolled down the window and held out her doctor's ID to him. I am Dr. Harper. Maria Santos contacted me. Victor took the ID, scrutinized it under a powerful flashlight, then shined the light directly into her face. His gaze was razor sharp, exposing all the fatigue and financial strain on her person. He signaled for the gate to open, but as Amelia stepped out of the car, Victor immediately stopped her. Place your medical bag on the hood. Spread your arms wide. Amelia complied. Victor thoroughly inspected every corner of her kit. He opened the earpieces of her stethoscope, gently shook the antiseptic bottle, and checked the bottom of the bag as if she were carrying explosive devices, not medical tools. The owner doesn't care for anything tainted entering the home, especially from the rougher parts of town. Amelia looked him straight in the eye, taking her bag back. The only contamination here is your prejudice. Lead the way. Victor smirked a look of blatant derision, then guided her through the heavy oak door. The mansion's corridor was long and deep, with a soaring ceiling and magnificent crystal chandeliers. But the space was chillingly cold, punctuated only by the echoing clack of Victor's heels on the marble floor, like a hammer tapping in an empty museum. Amelia shivered. A child living here must suffer from dreadful isolation. Victor stopped before a large double door gave 2 knocks and opened it. Elias Sterling's study was vast, filled with the aroma of aged paper and costly wood. The most powerful man in the energy sector sat behind a colossal desk, engrossed in a stack of documents. He didn't even look up when Amelia entered. 15 minutes. That's all the time I have for a pointless consultation. Amelia stood still in the center of the room, her hands tightly gripping her bag straps. I didn't come for a consultation. I came to examine a patient. At this, Elias finally raised his head. His ash-gray eyes swept over her rumpled lab coat, worn-out sneakers, and pale face. He leaned back in his chair, lacing his fingers together. Maria calls you a savior, but all I see is an exhausted doctor who looks more in need of a good meal than a patient. 18 of the world's leading specialists with million-dollar clinics have failed in this very room. What makes you think you can do better than them? Your poverty. The raw disdain in Elias's voice ignited Amelia's wounded self-respect. She stepped forward, bracing her hands on the polished wooden desk, and looked the billionaire directly in the eye. Have their tailored suits and framed diplomas saved your son yet? If they had, I wouldn't be standing here. You've used money to buy the best service, but sickness doesn't care about your bank account. Perhaps it's time you knitted someone not afraid to get their hands dirty, someone who wrestles survival from the clutches of illness every day, not someone who sits writing reports in an air-conditioned office. The room fell silent. Victor in the corner slightly raised an eyebrow. Elias stared at her, surprise flickering briefly in his eyes, quickly replaced by a rare amusement. He had never encountered anyone who dared to look him in the eye like that, especially a young woman who looked ready to collapse from lack of sleep. Fair enough. Elias stood up and walked around the desk. 1 week. I give you 7 days. Find the cause, and I'll wipe out your debt and give you anything else you desire. But if you fail, or if you cause my son any distress, I will ensure you are never allowed to practice medicine anywhere in this country again. Do you accept the stakes? Take me to the boys' room. Amelia's reply was concise. Mason's room, located on the 2nd floor, was decorated like a miniature palace with countless expensive toys. Mason lay in a finely carved oak crib. The 6-month-old was tiny, just skin and bones, his deep-set eyes dull as he stared at the ceiling. Amelia approached, her hand gently resting on his tiny chest. A normal heartbeat, clear lungs, no fever. Clinically, the boy was entirely well, but life was draining from this body like energy from a leaking battery. Maria Santos stood nearby, her eyes red with worry. Amelia turned to her, lowering her voice to avoid the security camera mounted on the wall. Maria, you told me over the phone you suspected something. Tell me now in detail. Maria darted a nervous glance around, then pulled Amelia into the room's most secluded corner where a wardrobe obstructed the camera's view. She whispered, her voice trembling with fear. It's not an illness, doctor. Every night after the lady of the house comes in to feed him. The room door suddenly burst open, slamming against the wall with a loud bang, cutting Maria's whisper short. Natasha Sterling Mason's mother appeared like a queen. She wore a custom silk dress that hugged her slender figure, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed without a strand out of place. What sent a chill down Amelia's spine was the look of cold cruelty. Natasha swept past the oak crib where her son was curled up. She didn't lean in, didn't smile, didn't even glance at the baby once. Her cold blue eyes were fixed only on Amelia with a look of disdainful scrutiny. So you're the miracle doctor my husband just fetched from the wrong side of the tracks. Natasha spoke, her voice smooth but sharp. You look more like someone in need of charity than a caregiver. Amelia closed her notebook, looking straight at the woman across from her. I came here to provide care for Mason Mrs. Sterling, and sometimes illness is an equal opportunity adversary, whether people live in castles or under a bridge. Natasha offered a slight smile that didn't reach her eyes. She walked toward the milk preparation counter in the corner of the room. "Be my guest. My husband enjoys throwing money out the window on false hopes anyway. One more won't make a difference." Amelia watched in silence. She had seen thousands of mothers prepare their babies' meals. Some were clumsy, others skilled, but all had an element of tenderness. They usually checked the milk temperature on their wrist or whispered soothing words to the child. But not Natasha. She performed the motions like a programmed automaton. Measured the water, poured the powder, shook it well, perfectly precise to the milliliter, yet cold and clinical. She performed the task as if mixing a chemical compound in a laboratory, not preparing a meal for her own flesh and blood. Natasha placed the feeding bottle on the table next to the crib and immediately turned to leave, without a good night, without a single tender touch. The door closed, leaving a heavy silence. As soon as the mother's presence was gone, Amelia immediately picked up the care log Maria had left on the table. She flipped through the pages, cross-referencing the timestamps. A frightening pattern emerged with stark clarity. Mason was completely settled during the day. He played happily, ate normally. But records of reflux distress and acute digestive upset were always densely concentrated between 2 and 4 in the morning. That was the time slot when Natasha personally attended to her son under the pretense of fulfilling her maternal duties without the caregiver. That night, as the clock struck 3 a.m. and the entire mansion was asleep, Amelia quietly slipped out of her room. She did not head toward the guest suite, but directly toward the kitchen area. The Sterling kitchen was vast and ultra-modern, spotlessly clean. Amelia did not search near the sink where everything would certainly have been cleaned. She opened the lid of the recycling bin in a secluded corner under the counter. The smell of refuse assailed her, but she ignored it. She rummaged deep underneath past empty food cartons and bottles. Her hand touched a piece of hard plastic, a used feeding bottle discarded instead of being washed for reuse. Amelia activated her phone's flashlight, examining the bottom of the bottle closely. A layer of cloudy white powder residue clung to the inner rim, its texture coarse, distinctly different from the smooth consistency of regular formula. Her heart pounded. This was not milk residue. This was something added afterward. She carefully used a small spoon from her kit to scrape off the residue, placing it into a sterile vial she carried. She quickly messaged David, a technician friend at the hospital. "David, I'm sending you a sample. Urgent testing tonight. Don't ask why, it's a matter of life and death." Amelia tucked the vial deep into her lab coat pocket, letting out a tense breath. She turned to leave the corridor and returned to her room. As she passed Mason's door, she instinctively glanced at the ceiling. The red indicator light of the security camera, which usually blinked constantly, was now completely dark. It had been deactivated, just as she had anticipated. A perfect dead zone for clandestine activities. A surge of anger boiled up inside Amelia. She clenched her fist, turning to hurry away and protect the evidence. But just as she rounded the corner of the dark corridor, she collided forcefully with a chest as hard as stone. Amelia staggered back, nearly dropping her phone. The flashlight beam flashed across an angular face with a long scar near the temple. Viktor Petrov stood towering, blocking her exit. He had his arms crossed, his cold gray eyes locked onto the hand she was trembling to hide in her pocket. "This is hardly the time for guests to be strolling," Dr. Harper Victor said, his voice laced with menace. "And I'm curious what fascinating item you just retrieved from my employer's refuse container." Amelia held her breath, her hand in her pocket, clutching the cold vial. She pulled her hand out empty, then calmly pointed toward the water dispenser at the end of the hall. I just got lost looking for the water cooler. You must be mistaken, Amelia quickly replied. Viktor Petrov said nothing, his gaze drilling into her as if searching for a lie. Finally, he took a step back, yielding the path, but his warning stare remained fixed on her back until she was out of sight. The next morning, the atmosphere in Mason's room was heavy. Amelia was engrossed in noting the boy's morning vital signs in her notebook when she felt a sharp, persistent gaze on the back of her neck. She turned around. Natasha Sterling was leaning against the doorframe, her arms crossed. The woman was flawlessly beautiful, but her eyes were ice-cold and filled with apprehension. What exactly are you writing in there? Dr. Harper. Natasha stepped closer, her strong perfume enveloping the small space around the crib. Just Mason's health metrics, madam. I don't believe that. Natasha curled her lips slightly, her finger tapping an uneven rhythm on the crib railing. I've observed you roaming the house at night. You're rummaging, you're prying. Are you trying to treat my son, or are you trying to dig up private details about this family to sell to the tabloids? Amelia closed her notebook. She recognized that the anxiety in Natasha's voice was not for her son, but for herself. My only concern is what goes into Mason's body and what happens to him. If you feel my observation is an intrusion, then perhaps you are worried I might see something you'd prefer to keep hidden. Natasha's face clouded with confusion. She didn't say another word, quickly turning and leaving the room. At the same time, in the security room, a night shift guard reported to Victor about Amelia's presence near the disposal area and the kitchen. Victor watched the surveillance screen, seeing Amelia tending to the baby with a rare level of tenderness for this house. He ordered the guard to continue monitoring, but did not rush to report to Elias. He wanted to see what the poor doctor was planning, but Natasha was not so patient. At noon, Victor knocked on Mason's door, informing Amelia that the owner wished to see her immediately. In the vast study, Elias Sterling sat behind his desk, his face set hard as stone. Natasha stood right beside her husband's chair, her hand placed on his shoulder, a clear gesture of possession and seeking protection. My wife informs me that you are overstepping the bounds of a caregiver, Harper. Elias began, his voice low, but weighted with authority. You were searching my home at night. You questioned staff. You made my wife feel insecure in her own residence. Amelia stood tall in the center of the room, facing the city's most powerful couple. She looked at Natasha, seeing the woman avoiding her gaze, clinging to her husband like a frightened kitten. I wasn't searching. I was looking for the cause. Amelia's voice was firm. You hired me because the 18 specialists before me failed. They failed because they only looked at Mason as a biological case. They searched for bacteria, viruses, genetics. But I am different. How so? Elias narrowed his eyes. I looked at his living environment. Amelia took a step forward. Mason is not sick, Mr. Sterling. He is physically sound. The problem is an external factor that is causing him to deteriorate. Something harmful is being ingested into his body that I haven't yet identified. The room fell silent. Natasha tightened her grip on Elias's shoulder, her fingernails digging into the expensive fabric. Are you suggesting we don't know how to care for our son? Natasha hissed, her voice strained. Elias, did you hear her? She's blaming us. Elias raised a hand to silence his wife. He stared intently at Amelia, his expression shifting from anger to the sharp assessment of a businessman evaluating risk. That is a very serious accusation, Dr. Harper. Are you saying that right here in the most heavily guarded fortress in New York, my son is being negatively affected? Yes. Amelia did not back down. And I will prove it. Elias stood up, walked around his desk, and stood directly in front of Amelia. The close proximity allowed her to feel the man's immense pressure. "You have confidence, or perhaps foolishness. I'm not sure which yet, but I'm a man of business. I need proof, not theories. You have until the end of this week. If you place irrefutable evidence on my desk, I will listen to you. If not, you will leave this house and my legal team will handle the remainder of your professional life." Agreed. Amelia turned and left the study. Her heart hammered in her chest. She had bought time, but time was not on Mason's side. The vial in her pocket wasn't enough. She needed visual evidence. She needed to catch the perpetrator in the act. But in this house, she was a closely watched outsider. She couldn't install monitoring equipment or tail Natasha 24/7. She needed someone with access to every corner of the house, someone who could control the electronic eyes on the walls. Amelia did not return to her room. She walked down the corridor to another room, took a deep breath, and knocked. Viktor Petrov opened the door. He wasn't surprised to see Amelia standing there, but his hand still rested loosely on his belt, the reflex of a seasoned security professional. The monitoring room was a few degrees cooler than the hallway outside, filled with the blue light from dozens of blinking screens. Amelia stepped in, closing the heavy steel door behind her. She had no time for hesitation or fear. She pulled the folded-up lab test result from her pocket and slapped it onto the cold metal desk right in front of the man who commanded all the eyes of the house. "Read this." Viktor glanced at the paper, then back at her. He picked it up, his gray eyes quickly scanning the dense medical jargon, then stopping at the bolded conclusion. Bisacodyl A stool softener. Viktor looked up, his voice low and dangerous. "What are you trying to prove, that our chef doesn't wash the vegetables properly? That dosage is 10 times the adult limit, Viktor. And it was found in a 6-month-old baby's feeding bottle." Amelia moved closer, ignoring the safe distance Viktor usually maintained with strangers. She pointed at the screen displaying Mason's room, where the child was in an exhausted slumber. "That is not food contamination. It is intentional poisoning. A deliberate act carried out nightly right under your nose, inside the home you guard 24/7. Viktor's jaw clenched, a distinct muscle visible in his temple. He slammed the paper onto the table. "No one accesses Mason's meals except me and Maria. Everything is screened, except what is administered between 2 and 4 a.m. Amelia's statement hit Viktor like a cold splash of water. His usual confidence and arrogance cracked. He turned his back to Amelia, staring intensely at the wall of screens. In the bottom right corner, the panel showing Mason's room was operating normally, but Viktor knew its function better than anyone. "That camera is deactivated for the owner's privacy," Viktor said, but his voice lacked conviction. The lady of the house wanted private time with her son. That was Mr. Elias's directive, and it is within that private time that Mason is having his life drained away. Amelia stepped beside him, her voice lowered, no longer a challenge, but the plea of someone desperately trying to save a life. "I know you care about the boy. I've seen the way you look at Mason when you pass his room. You're more than just a paid guard, Viktor. You've been here since the day he was born. You saw how healthy he was, and now you see his decline. Do you truly want to stand by and watch that child waste away just to comply with a blind order about privacy?" Viktor remained silent. He looked at the black and white image of Mason on the screen. The baby was curled up, heartbreakingly tiny in the large crib. Viktor recalled the early days when the young master was born, his cries echoing through the mansion and the rare smile on Elias's face. He also remembered the recent nights Mason's painful, heart-wrenching cries. His loyalty to Elias was absolute, but protecting the Sterling family included safeguarding the sole heir. If the adversary was within the house, then turning a blind eye was the ultimate betrayal. Victor turned back, his expression now changed. No longer suspicion, only the cold determination of a hunter. "What do you require?" Amelia breathed a sigh of relief, but she knew this was just the start. "I need visual proof, something undeniable. I need a hidden recording device in that room." Victor nodded. He walked over to a locked equipment cabinet in the corner, entered a code, and took out a small black box. Inside was a micro camera the size of a shirt button. This is the type used in industrial intelligence. It operates independently, not connected to the house's server system, transmitting directly via an encrypted signal. The battery lasts 48 hours. He handed the device to Amelia, but then pulled his hand back. "No, you don't know how to angle the shot. If she detects it, both you and I will disappear from New York before sunrise. You will install it tonight, during the shift change." Victor slipped the device into his suit jacket pocket. "Return to your room and wait. Do nothing reckless." Amelia left the security room feeling as if a massive stone had been lifted, only to be replaced by another heavier one. She returned to Mason's room. The baby was still asleep, his tiny chest weakly rising and falling. She sat down on the armchair beside the crib, gently touching Mason's tiny hand. It was cold. She rubbed it gently to impart a little warmth. In this quiet moment, the image of Lily returned. Her sister had lain in a hospital bed with the exact same tired expression, waiting for a miracle that Amelia's money couldn't buy. Now she was risking everything. If this plan failed, if Natasha discovered the camera before they had proof, Amelia would not only lose her career and her chance to save Lily, but she could also lose her life. People like Elias Sterling and his in-laws did not handle problems with polite letters. Mason stirred, letting out a small whimper in his sleep. Amelia softly patted his back, humming a lullaby she used to sing to Lily. She felt like an intruder, a spy in this home, but looking at this innocent child, she knew she had no right to be afraid. The truth was more savage than any nightmare, and it was about to be exposed. Time moved slowly like thick molasses. The wall clock ticked with a dry, monotonous sound. Midnight. The Sterling mansion was enveloped in darkness and stillness. Mason's door creaked open slightly. There was no sound. If Amelia hadn't been straining her eyes in the darkness, she wouldn't have noticed the figure entering. Victor moved like a ghost. He didn't turn on the light, relying only on the faint glow from the nightlight spilling from the hallway. Amelia sat motionless in the chair, holding her breath and watching. Victor approached the toy shelf opposite the crib. He reached for a large brown teddy bear, the classic kind Mason had never touched. His movements were swift and precise. In a matter of seconds, the bear's left plastic eye was replaced with the micro camera lens. He placed the bear back, adjusting the angle slightly to ensure it captured both the crib and the feeding counter in the corner of the room. Finished. Victor turned to look at Amelia. He said nothing, only gave a very subtle nod before vanishing through the door as quickly as he had appeared. Amelia was left alone in the dark. She took out her phone. A message from an unknown number arrived, containing only a link. She tapped it. Her phone screen lit up, displaying a sharp black and white image of the room she was sitting in. The angle from the teddy bear was frighteningly perfect. She saw herself huddled in the chair and Mason lying peacefully in the crib. 2:00 in the morning. The main security camera light on the wall snapped off. The dead zone had begun. Amelia stood up, left Mason's room, and returned to the adjacent guest room. She locked her door, sat on the bed, and placed the phone on the pillow. The screen emitted a ghostly blue light, illuminating her intensely strained face. Amelia didn't dare blink. She stared at the still image on the phone, waiting for the adversary to reveal itself, in the guise of a mother. And then the doorknob in the video began to turn. The door opened. Natasha Sterling walked into her son's room. In the dim light cast from the hallway, her long white silk robe swept the floor, her blonde hair cascading over her thin shoulders. She did not immediately approach the crib. She stopped listening to the silence, her head slightly tilted toward the window, as if to ensure no one was watching. Amelia sat on her bed in her room, clutching her phone so tightly that her knuckles hurt. She wanted to scream, to rush into the next room to stop the woman, but reason held her in place. She needed this moment. Mason needed this moment to be permanently freed. On the screen, Natasha walked toward the preparation counter. She picked up the feeding bottle that had been pre-made. Then, with a practiced chilling motion, she reached into her robe pocket, pulling out a small vial. Swiftly uncapping it, she poured a generous amount of white powder into the bottle, sealed the lid, and shook it gently. There was no hesitation. "Oh God," Amelia whispered, a wave of nausea rising in her throat. She had just witnessed a painful truth unfold right on her phone screen. Natasha set the bottle down and picked Mason up. The baby stirred instinctively, burying his head in his mother's chest, seeking comfort. Natasha sat down in the armchair, holding the bottle to his mouth. And then she began to speak. Through the camera's ultra-sensitive audio system, Natasha's voice resonated clearly, not with a loving lullaby, but with the confession of a broken soul. "Drink up, my good boy. Drink up and go to sleep deeply." Natasha stroked Mason's thin hair, her eyes staring blankly into the distance. "I'm so sorry, Mason. I know your tummy hurts. I know you're tired, but I have no other choice. Do you know where your father's planning to go tomorrow? He's planning to fly to London. He's going to leave your mother and you in this vast, dreadful house for another 2 weeks." Amelia shivered. She pressed the phone close to her ear, listening to every word that fell from the wealthy woman's lips. "But if you're unwell, if you're unwell, it's different." Natasha chuckled softly, a sound that resembled a choked sob. "When you were sick this morning, your father canceled his meeting. He stayed home for lunch." He looked at me. For the first time in 3 months, Elias saw me, Mason. He asked if I was tired. He held my hand. Natasha leaned down and kissed the forehead of the baby, who was eagerly sucking on the bottle containing the harmful substance. "I don't want you to hurt. I love you very much. I just need you to be a little fragile. Just enough so your father will need me. He'll stay home. We'll be a happy family, won't we? Just endure a little pain for your mother." Amelia felt hot tears streaming down her face. She had suspected, but hearing Natasha herself admit the savage reasoning left her stunned. It wasn't hatred. It was a distorted, sick form of affection. Natasha was using her son's well-being as a tether to hold on to her frequently absent billionaire husband. Mason finished the bottle. Natasha placed him back in the crib and tucked the blanket around him. She stood up, sighing softly, as if having completed a sacred duty. Natasha turned to leave, but then she paused, her gaze fixed on the gap beneath the door connecting to the guest room where Amelia was located. In the darkness of the hallway, the blue light from Amelia's phone screen, though faint, cast a dim glow onto the wooden floor. Natasha narrowed her eyes. She quickly moved out of Mason's room, not closing the door, and headed straight for Amelia's room. Amelia saw the action on the screen. Her heart seized up. She frantically turned off her phone screen, shoved it into her pants pocket, and rushed to the door. She had to check on Mason. She had to ensure the boy was helped to clear out the substance immediately. Amelia's door burst open. She stepped out into the dark corridor, and Natasha Sterling was standing there. The two women faced each other in the darkness, only steps apart. Natasha was panting, her chest rising and falling beneath the silk robe. The false calm from moments before had vanished, replaced by the panic of an animal cornered. "You're not asleep." Natasha's voice was hoarse. "What are you doing in that room without a light on? Why are you awake at this hour?" "I heard a noise," Amelia responded, struggling to keep her voice level, her hand in her pocket clutching the rapidly heating phone. "I was coming to check on Mason. He seemed distressed." "My son is fine." Natasha screamed, the shrill sound shattering the night silence. "Don't touch him. Don't pretend you understand him better than me. You're an outsider. You'll be gone by morning." Mrs. Natasha Amelia took a step forward, her voice sharp. "I know what you just did. I know what was in the vial you hid in your robe. Let me go in and help Mason expel the substance before it's too late." Natasha's face went white, her eyes widened, staring blankly at Amelia. You saw Natasha backed up a step, then her gaze dropped to Amelia's pocket where the phone screen had just briefly illuminated from a new notification. "You recorded me." Natasha lunged forward before Amelia could react. She seized Amelia's wrist, her sharp fingernails digging into the skin. The strength of her desperation made the slender woman unnervingly powerful. "Give it to me. Give me the phone. Let go. You're harming your own child. Can't you understand?" Amelia struggled, trying to push Natasha away. "Elias will learn the truth. You need help, Natasha. Stop this. No one must know." Natasha shrieked. "You're trying to ruin my family. You're trying to steal my husband. You want to send me to jail so you can take my place, don't you?" "You menaced Natasha." Yanked Amelia's arm. The phone flew out of her pocket, sliding across the marble floor but remaining intact. The screen lit up clearly, displaying the paused frame of Natasha pouring the substance into the feeding bottle. Seeing the clear evidence lying there, Natasha lost all control. She didn't rush to pick up the phone, instead, turning to attack Amelia with all her pent-up malice. She grabbed Amelia's shoulders, pushing her hard backward. Amelia stumbled. Behind her was the empty space of the staircase leading down to the ground floor. "Get away. Get out of my life." Natasha exerted all her strength, shoving Amelia one final time. Amelia lost her balance. Her hands flailed in the air, trying to find something to grasp. Her fingers brushed against the cold wooden railing, but instantly slipped due to perspiration. The world spun. Amelia's body plunged into the empty space. The first impact on the stone stair tread knocked the breath from her lungs. She tumbled down each iron-hard step, pounding her shoulder, her hip, her head. Pain exploded, tearing through her consciousness. Amelia slid all the way to the mid-landing of the staircase. She lay motionless, her vision blurred by the agony. Warm blood began to flow from her temple, seeping into her matted hair. In the final moment of clarity, before darkness consumed everything, Amelia looked up. At the top of the stairs, Natasha Sterling stood, her arms hanging loose, the white robe billowing slightly in the cold draft from the hallway. She looked down at Amelia with a vacant, emotionless face, like a fallen angel statue who had just completed her sentence. Then Amelia's eyelids drooped. Everything fell silent. Will the fateful fall bury the truth forever? What will be the fate of Amelia and baby Mason now that the sole piece of evidence has slipped from her grasp? Hold your breath and follow the next development immediately. The sound of Amelia's body hitting the marble floor echoed sharply, tearing through the stillness of the night in the Sterling mansion. Victor Petrov, on duty in the nearby security room, had heard the prior scream. He rushed into the hallway just in time to see Amelia's small form lying still at the foot of the stairs, and Natasha Sterling standing at the top, her face distraught as she gazed down at her handiwork. Victor did not hesitate for a second. He radioed orders to the family's private medical team and other security personnel. 2 guards immediately ran upstairs, restraining the panicked Natasha, preventing her from causing further harm. Victor knelt, checking Amelia's pulse. She was still breathing. He spotted her phone a few feet away, the screen still lit. Victor picked it up, shut off the screen, and placed it in his inner suit pocket. Ambulance lights swept across the front courtyard. Victor gently lifted Amelia, placing her on the stretcher, then turned to call Elias. His voice was chillingly calm. "Boss, come home immediately." The scent of antiseptic mixed with the subtle aroma of lilies woke Amelia. She tried to open her eyes, but her eyelids felt heavy as lead. The first sensation was a sharp, throbbing pain running down her spine, and left arm a stark reminder of the horrific fall the previous night. Amelia blinked a few times to adjust to the soft light in the room. This was no ordinary hospital room. High ceilings, silk drapes, and the quiet whirring of the most advanced medical equipment next to her. She turned her head to the side. A figure was slumped with his head in his hands by the bedside, his fingers tightly woven into his messy hair. Elias. The man startled, looking up. Amelia almost didn't recognize the billionaire Elias Sterling. The usual arrogance and coldness had vanished completely. Before her was a man with bloodshot, exhausted eyes, his expensive suit wrinkled as if he'd been sitting there for ages. Elias hurriedly stood up, pouring a glass of warm water and holding it to her lips. "Don't move abruptly. The doctor says you have a hairline fracture in your arm and a mild concussion. Thankfully, no spinal damage." Amelia took a sip of water, her dry throat somewhat soothed. Memories flooded back like a waterfall. Natasha, the feeding bottle, the staircase, my phone, the video. Elias set the glass down and pulled a chair closer to her. He looked directly into her eyes, his gaze filled with profound remorse. "Victor sent it to me as soon as he brought you to the emergency room. I watched it. I replayed it 10 times overnight." Amelia remained silent, waiting. "I saw my wife put the substance in the bottle. I heard her talking to Mason." Elias swallowed hard, his voice low and breaking. "She said she wanted to make him sick to keep me at home. She said the loneliness in that house was more terrifying than death." "Where is Natasha?" Amelia asked softly. "Switzerland." The short answer surprised Amelia. Immediately after watching the video and receiving the hospital report on the harmful substance in Mason's blood, I signed the authorization papers. Elias laced his hands together, his knuckles white. My lawyers and the family's private doctor completed the procedures overnight. Natasha was placed on a private jet at 4 a.m. She will be treated at a secluded psychiatric facility in Zurich. It's the best place in the world for cases like hers, but also a place she can never leave without the medical board's consent. You didn't contact the authorities. It would be easy to send her to jail, Amelia. But how would Mason grow up knowing his mother was a criminal who deliberately harmed him? I chose this path to protect my son. Natasha will never be allowed near Mason again. The divorce and restraining order were filed in court this morning. Amelia looked at the powerful man before her. He had handled a horrific family tragedy in a matter of hours with the chilling efficiency of a CEO. But beneath that exterior, she saw the devastation. How is Mason Elias's expression softened slightly when he spoke of his son? The boy is at Mount Sinai Children's Hospital. The doctors say that without exposure to the substance, his body is recovering very quickly. This morning, Mason was able to consume normal formula without discomfort. He started smiling at the nurses. Amelia sighed in relief, closing her eyes. Thank heaven. Don't thank heaven. Thank yourself. Elias lowered his head further, his voice trembling. You were the only one who saw the truth. And I am his father. I lived in the same house, yet I was blind. Elias, you couldn't have known. No, I did know. Elias interrupted, his voice bitter. Natasha was right in that video. I abandoned her. I thought giving her luxury and an unlimited credit card was enough. I built a golden cage, locked her and my son inside, and then left to conquer the world. I turned my wife into a mentally unwell person through my own negligence. Amelia saw the repressed tears in the oil magnate's eyes. This was not an excuse for Natasha's actions, but the confession of a man realizing money could not fill an emotional void. She made a mistake, Elias. But you still have a chance to make amends. Mason is still here. He needs a father, not a corporation president. Elias looked up at Amelia. In his gaze, she saw infinite gratitude and a connection that had never existed between them before. I will change. I promise you. And I owe you my son's life. The hospital room door creaked open slightly. Viktor Petrov stepped in holding a small box. The solid man also looked tired after a sleepless night. He walked to the bedside, bowing his head to Amelia with a respect he had never shown anyone but Elias before. Dr. Harper, I'm glad you're awake. Thank you, Victor. If you hadn't arrived in time, I should have protected you better, Victor said. I let you face the danger alone while I sat safely in the control room. That was my failure. He placed the box on the bedside table. Your old phone was destroyed in the fall. I transferred all the data contacts and images to this new device, and of course, the original video has been backed up onto 3 separate secure servers. Amelia picked up the new phone. Thank you. You did your part very well, Victor. Don't blame yourself anymore. Victor nodded, stepping back to stand behind Elias's chair. The atmosphere in the room settled, carrying a rare calm after the storm. Mason was safe. The truth was exposed. Amelia felt she had completed her mission, but that calm did not last. Elias's phone on the table vibrated fiercely, the jarring ringtone shattering the quiet. The screen lit up, displaying a name that made the air in the room freeze: Ivan Vulov. Elias looked at the name, his eyes, which had just shown remorse, now darkened, returning to the cold, ruthless demeanor of a magnate. He knew what this call meant. Ivan Vulov never called to inquire about health. I'm listening, Ivan. Silence stretched for a breath on the other end, long enough for the tension to spread through the stark white hospital room. When Ivan Vulov's voice came, it was not the volume of rage, but low and distinct, like a sentence delivered by a judge. Did you think you could lock up the only daughter of the Vulov family in a sanatorium in Switzerland without consulting me, Elias? Do you treat my family's honor as a scrap of paper that you can tear up whenever you please? Elias stood up, walking toward the plate glass window, turning his back to Amelia's bed. He looked down at the bustling city of New York below, but his mind was set on the negotiation table with his enemy. Your daughter deliberately harmed your grandson, Ivan. She is unwell. She needs medical professionals, not a cover-up. I did this to save Mason's life and to save Natasha from becoming a perpetrator. Ivan's cynical laugh echoed cold and dry. Don't lecture me about morality. In business, there are only advantages and reputation. You publicly embarrassed me in front of my associates. You openly committed your wife right before we were due to sign our joint exploitation contract. You chose to engage in conflict, Elias. Don't blame me for being ruthless. What are you planning? Elias asked, his jaw tight. I will teach you a lesson about respecting your elders. Check the financial news tomorrow morning. And remember, this is just the appetizer. The call disconnected. Elias lowered the phone, its dark screen reflecting his worried face. Ivan Vulov's threat was not empty talk. Less than 24 hours later, the Sterling Energy empire began to shake. A barrage of damaging rumors appeared simultaneously on major financial news outlets. Sterling Energy Corporation was under investigation for tax fraud. Their largest oil field in the Middle East experienced an environmental spill crisis, and banks abruptly froze credit lines. It was an all-out, meticulously orchestrated attack. Sterling Energy's stock plummeted uncontrollably. Partners called to cancel contracts. The board of directors pressured Elias for an explanation. Elias was buried in his office, attempting to steer the colossal vessel which was taking on water amidst the storm. While Elias was fighting the economic battle, Amelia lay in the hospital following the news on the wall-mounted television. She saw images of Elias surrounded by reporters outside the corporation, building his face haggard, but still striving to maintain his composure. She knew he was paying the price for his decision to protect Mason and her. "I need to be discharged," Amelia told the nurse as she came in to change her dressing. "But Dr. Harper, your shoulder fracture hasn't fully healed. You need at least 2 more days of observation. I am a medical professional. I know my condition. I can't stay here indefinitely." Amelia was resolute. She felt useless lying on the soft bed while the man who had saved her sister was taking the punishment alone. She couldn't assist him financially, but she could return to care for Mason so he could focus on confronting Ivan. Viktor Petrov appeared right as Amelia signed her discharge papers. He looked just as exhausted as his employer. "Mr. Elias wanted me to assign 2 security personnel to escort you 24/7. Things are extremely volatile, Dr. Harper. Ivan Vulov will stop at nothing." Amelia shook her head, putting on her jacket to cover her arm in the sling. "No, Victor. Elias needs the manpower to protect Mason and handle the corporate crisis. Don't waste resources on me. I'm just a minor pediatrician. Ivan Vulov wouldn't even notice me. His target is capital and reputation, not an outsider like me. But I'm going home resting for a moment, then heading straight to the children's hospital to see Mason. I'll take a taxi. Don't worry." Amelia smiled reassuringly at Victor, then picked up her bag and left. She wanted to prove her strength, that she wasn't a liability, but she had gravely underestimated the ruthlessness of those at the summit of power. It was already twilight when Amelia left the children's hospital after visiting Mason. The boy was sleeping soundly, his cheeks rosy again. Seeing the healthy child was the best relief for her pain right now. The parking lot behind the hospital was deserted. The pale yellow streetlights cast a dim glow on the road dappled with puddles from the afternoon rain. Amelia's footsteps echoed in solitude. She walked toward her old Honda Civic, her mind still preoccupied with Elias's tired face on the television. Suddenly, a chill ran down her neck. A feeling of being watched traced down her spine. Amelia stopped spinning around. There were only rows of silently parked cars and long shadows cast onto the pavement. No one was there. "I'm just overthinking," she reassured herself, turning back to continue. But just as she inserted the key into the car door lock, a very faint sound came from beside her. The door of a black van parked right next to her car slid open. 2 men in black suits stepped out. They were not masked, their faces cold professional, and not resembling common street thugs. "Dr. Harper." One spoke, his voice polite, but allowing no room for refusal. Amelia backed away, her hand fumbling for the pepper spray in her handbag, but her injured arm made her slow. "Who are you? Mr. Vulov would like to invite you for a cup of tea." Before Amelia could scream, the other man moved behind her with lightning speed. She felt a tiny prick, a sharp sting in her neck area. A high-potency sedative injection. The world before Amelia swam. Her legs turned to jelly. The key slipped from her hand, clattering onto the asphalt. The man caught her before she fell, gently guiding her into the van as if she were intoxicated. The door closed, swallowing her into the darkness. The vehicle drove away smoothly, blending into the heavy New York traffic, leaving no trace. When Amelia regained consciousness, she found herself sitting in a red velvet armchair. Her mind was still hazy from the sedatives, but she could smell the aroma of sandalwood and strong Earl Grey tea. This was no damp warehouse or basement. This was an overwhelmingly luxurious office with walls paneled in dark oak and classic oil paintings. Across from her, seated behind a low tea table, was an older man with white hair slicked back, Ivan Vulov. He was leisurely pouring tea into a delicate bone china cup. "Are you awake?" Dr. Ivan pushed the teacup toward her. "Apologies for the inconvenience. My staff can sometimes be a bit overly efficient in their welcoming methods." Amelia tried to sit up straight, the ache in her shoulder reminding her of the reality. She did not touch the tea. "What do you want?" Ivan chuckled, taking a sip of tea. "You are a shrewd person, Dr. Harper. You are indeed without capital, but you possess something far more valuable. You are Elias Sterling's newest vulnerability." He set the teacup down, standing up to walk toward a wall filled with television screens. He turned one on. The financial news was reporting Sterling Energy stock hitting its lowest point in 10 years. "I am squeezing him out," Ivan said proudly. "But Elias is stubborn. He would rather lose capital than yield. I need a piece to checkmate this game. And you, the one who caused him to commit his wife, are the queen I need." Ivan signaled to a subordinate standing in the corner. The man brought over a tablet, connecting it to the large wall screen. "Connect." The screen flickered for a few seconds, then displayed an image of Elias's office. He was sitting there, his shirt disheveled, rubbing his temple in exhaustion. When he saw the video call signal from the unknown number, he frowned, then pressed accept. Elias's face appeared clearly on the large screen. He saw Ivan Vulov, and his eyes flashed with fury. "Ivan, what do you want now? I told you." Elias's words caught in his throat as Ivan stepped aside, revealing Amelia sitting in the armchair behind her face, pale but her eyes still wide and resolute. Elias shot up from his chair, knocking over the coffee cup on his desk. The panic he had tried to conceal for the last 24 hours now exploded on his face. Ivan Vulov smiled, the chilling smile of one who had seized their opponent's weakness. He gently placed his hand on Amelia's shoulder. "Hello, Elias. You seem preoccupied with your worthless stock. So I invited Dr. Harper here so we could communicate more effectively." "Don't touch her," Elias roared. "She has nothing to do with our business." "On the contrary," Ivan replied calmly. "She is the reason my daughter's locked away, and now she will be the reason you sign the new agreement." Ivan gently pushed Amelia toward the camera, looking straight into Elias's eyes through the screen. "Listen carefully, Elias. I want the full rights to the North Sea natural gas extraction, and I want my daughter Natasha in New York before dinner tomorrow. Sign the transfer documents and release my daughter, or this diligent doctor will disappear permanently from the face of the earth. You have 24 hours. Elias Sterling stared intently at the tablet screen. The image of Amelia tied to the red velvet chair, her face pale but her eyes still radiating resilience, felt like a dagger thrust into his heart. But Elias did not bellow. "Understood. I'll come." Elias said, his voice so composed that Ivan Vulov on the other end narrowed his eyes in suspicion. "Send the coordinates. Do not cause her any distress, or the North Sea gas field will be the least of your concerns." The screen went dark. Elias stood up, straightening his shirt collar. He turned to Victor Petrov, who was standing beside him with a laptop open. "Did you capture the signal?" Victor typed furiously, blue lines of code streaming across the screen. Confirmed, boss. The signal is transmitting from a secluded estate in Long Island, a 40-minute drive from here. Prepare the vehicle. Call in the Alpha team. I want everything executed in silence. The Sterling security team were not crude mercenaries. They were a collective of former intelligence agents and top technological experts. As the specialized vehicle carrying Elias sped through the night, Victor sat in the passenger seat directing the operation via his earpiece. Initiate Ghost Protocol. I want Ivan's security system completely disabled before we reach the main gate. No sounds, no bloodshed. The car raced down the highway. Elias sat in the back, his hand resting on a thick black file. In the world of those at the pinnacle of power, information was the most devastating weapon. He looked out the window as the city lights receded behind them. He remembered Amelia's determined look when she said she would return to the hospital. She had risked her safety for his son, for his family. Now was the time for him to repay that debt. Ivan Vulov's estate appeared from behind the dense tree line. It was guarded by an electric fence and a heavy deployment of guards. But for the Alpha team, this was merely a simple training exercise. A mile away, a military-grade jamming device was activated. The entire system of cameras, radios, and motion sensors at Ivan's estate went dark. Simultaneously, smoke grenades containing a powerful anesthetic gas were accurately fired at the guard posts. Ivan's soldiers dropped quietly, as if falling into a deep sleep, unable to utter a single sound. The main gate of the estate swung open. Elias stepped out. He walked through the grand hall, stepping past the unconscious guards slumped on the floor. He headed directly for the large oak door at the end of the hallway where a yellow light shone out. Inside the study, Ivan Vulov was raising a teacup to his lips, waiting for a doorbell or the clamor of a skirmish. But there was nothing. Only a deadly silence. The door opened. Ivan startled, the tea in his cup spilling. He saw Elias Sterling standing there alone, unarmed, his suit as immaculate as if he had just stepped out of a board meeting. "You? How did you get in here?" Ivan stammered, his eyes quickly scanning the door for his subordinates. "They're all resting, Ivan." Elias stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "I told you I would come. I keep my word." Amelia sat in the chair, eyes wide as she looked at Elias. She wanted to call his name, but her throat tightened. He had come. He had actually come alone into the enemy's lair for her. Ivan stood up, trying to regain his authority. He pulled a compact pistol from his desk drawer, pointing it straight at Elias's chest. "You are far too arrogant, Elias. Did you think you could walk out of here without signing the transfer documents?" Elias did not flinch. He walked calmly to the tea table, tossing the black file right in front of Ivan. The sound of the paper hitting the wooden table was sharp and decisive. "Put that toy down, Ivan. You are a businessman, not a street-level thug. You know the trouble that taking a life will bring." "What is this?" Ivan glanced at the file. The death warrant for the Vulov Empire. Elias said, his voice cold. "Inside are the details of 124 money laundering transactions through banks in the Cayman Islands over the last 10 years. Evidence of your tax evasion in 3 European countries, and most interestingly, the file on how you bribed officials to secure the oil pipeline project last year." Ivan's face went pale. The hand holding the gun began to tremble. "You? How long have you been collecting this?" "Since the first day we partnered. I never shake hands without gloves, Ivan. You taught me that." Elias leaned his hands on the table, bringing his face close to his opponent's. "You have 2 options now. 1, release Amelia and retreat gracefully. I will keep this file confidential, and you can continue to be a magnate in your little corner. 2, you pull the trigger. And 5 minutes after my heart stops, All of this documentation will be automatically sent to the FBI, Interpol, and every major financial newspaper worldwide. The air in the room became thick. Ivan looked at the file, then at Elias. Capital and power were his lifeblood. If he lost everything, he would rather perish. The gun in Ivan's hand slowly lowered. He let out a long breath, slumping back into his chair like a deflated balloon. He knew he had lost. "Let her go," Ivan said, his voice hoarse, waving his hand weakly. "And take that damn file with you." Elias did not smile. He didn't need to display victory. He picked up the file, handing it to Victor, who had just entered the room. Then he rushed to Amelia's side. Elias's hands trembled as he untied the rope knots on her wrists. As soon as the rope loosened, Amelia collapsed forward, burying her face in his shoulder. She wept. Tears of fear, relief, and sheer joy burst onto the expensive fabric of his suit jacket. "It's all right. I'm here now," Elias whispered, gently stroking her disheveled hair. He helped her stand, guiding her out of the room, heavy with the scent of ambition and schemes. They walked out of the estate beneath the starry night sky. The fresh air rushed into Amelia's lungs, making her feel truly alive again. Sterling's security team was quietly withdrawing, leaving Ivan Vulov sitting alone amidst the wreckage of his pride. Elias opened the car door, helping Amelia into the back seat. He didn't let go of her hand. "Amelia," he said softly as the car began to move. "I apologize for dragging you into this, but there's something I need to tell you right now." Amelia looked up at him, her eyes still tearful. "What is it? Is it about Ivan?" "No. It's about Lily." The name of her sister made Amelia's heart tighten. She had been gone for over 24 hours. "How is Lily? Is she—" "She's had the surgery." Elias gently squeezed her hand. "The bone marrow transplant was performed this morning. It was completely successful. She's in the recovery room and her vitals are all stable." Amelia was stunned. She stared at him, unable to believe her ears. "But the deposit—" I covered everything," Elias said, his voice unusually gentle. "From the first day you stepped into my home, I had someone look into you. I knew about the debt, about Lily, about everything. I paid off your debt and secretly wired the money to the hospital under the name of a charitable foundation. I didn't mention it because I wanted you to focus on saving Mason, and also because I was afraid you would refuse kindness from someone like me." Amelia gasped. She looked at the city's most powerful man sitting beside her, the man who had just single-handedly protected her from a dangerous situation, now confessing his secretive actions like a young boy afraid of being scolded. All the burdens that had weighed on her shoulders for years, debt, her sister's illness, her solitude suddenly vanished. She didn't know what to say. "Thank you" seemed too trivial compared to what he had done. Elias looked at her, awaiting a reaction. In his anxious eyes, Amelia realized one thing: he hadn't used money to buy her off. He had used money to protect what she loved most, just as she had protected his son. The car sped through the night, leaving the danger behind, heading toward the light of the hospital, where the two most important lives for them awaited a new beginning. The car stopped at the hospital entrance, but Elias did not immediately open the door. He turned, looking deeply into Amelia's eyes, his gaze devoid of the merchant's barriers. "The day you came to my house, I had you investigated," Elias confessed, his voice warm and low. "Not to find fault, but I needed to know who was holding my son's life in their hands. When I learned about Lily and the debt, I cleared everything immediately. Consider it a down payment on my faith in you, and also a belated apology for my initial skepticism." Amelia started to decline, but Elias took her hand, his grip gentle yet firm. "You didn't just save Mason. Your courage woke up my heart, Amelia. You taught me a valuable lesson. True power isn't about controlling the world or manipulating rivals. It's the ability to protect the people you care about most. 1 year later, the Sterling mansion was no longer the dark, icy fortress of the past. Golden autumn sunlight poured into the marble hallways, blending with Mason's gurgling laughter. The 18-month-old, chubby and rosy-cheeked, was toddling around, chasing a ball under Lily's cheerful encouragement. Amelia's sister was fully recovered, her hair grown back full of the vitality of a future nursing student. In the kitchen, Lily and Maria's clatter as they prepared dinner created the cozy sounds of a family, a sound Elias had never dared to dream of before. After dinner, when Mason had fallen asleep, Elias led Amelia to his son's room, the room that had once been the setting for tragedy, holding dark secrets in a feeding bottle, now only contained serenity. The cold surveillance camera had been removed, replaced by photos documenting Mason's milestones. Beside the oak crib, Elias knelt on one knee. Gone was the arrogant, detached demeanor of an oil billionaire. Before Amelia was only a man who had been reborn through affection. He presented a velvet box inside a simple yet meaningful plain ring. Amelia, you healed my son and me when we were most broken. Now, please grant me the chance to care for you for the rest of our lives. Shall we build a real family together? Amelia looked at Mason sleeping soundly with steady breaths, then at the man kneeling before her with anticipation in his eyes. She smiled, nodding as tears of happiness streamed down her face. She understood that everyday fairy tales were not without sorrow, but about overcoming that sorrow together to find final peace. Elias placed the ring on her finger, then stood to embrace her. He gently placed his hand on hers, which rested on the crib railing, and in his sleep, Mason's tiny hand reached out and grasped his father's finger. Under the soft glow of the nightlight, 3 hands held tight. A turbulent journey had closed, opening a future of healing and lasting happiness. The story serves as a poignant cautionary tale about glamorous isolation. Natasha's tragedy stemmed not just from her mental health condition, but also from the cold neglect of a husband preoccupied with the pursuit of power. Elias Sterling was wealthy in capital, but poor in connection, nearly paying the price with his son's life. True power lies not in the capacity to control the world, but in the capacity to protect and cherish those beside you. And sometimes the miracle doesn't come from expensive specialists, but from a brave heart willing to face the most painful truths. Note: the preceding story is entirely fictional. Character names, locations, and incidents were created for the purpose of illustrating educational and artistic themes. Any resemblance to real people or actual events is purely coincidental.